The sun spilled over Rome like liquid gold, painting the ancient city in hues of amber and rose, as cobblestone streets hummed with the soft clatter of early morning scooters and the chatter of vendors arranging their stalls with baskets of ripe figs and warm cornetti. In a modest hotel near the Pantheon, its walls adorned with faded frescoes and ivy creeping up the balcony railings, 12-year-old Lila Thompson stood alone by a tall window in the bustling lobby, her sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. Her classmates from Chicago, a lively group of 7th graders on the final day of a cultural exchange trip, filled the air with laughter and chaos, their voices weaving a tapestry of stories about racing through the Colosseum's ancient arches, kneading dough in a pasta-making class under the stern gaze of a Roman chef named Giovanni, and sneaking extra scoops of pistachio gelato when their chaperones weren't looking. Lila, though, was different, her brown eyes wide and thoughtful, tracing the delicate arc of a plane's contrail slicing through the dawn sky, her mind far from the souvenirs. Tiny Colosseum replicas, Vatican postcards, or keychains shaped, like Vespers, that her peers clutched with pride, eager to flaunt back home in Chicago's windy streets. For Lila, the trip's magic wasn't in the ruins or the food, but in the promise of flight, the way a plane's engines roared like a heartbeat, lifting tons of steel into the clouds with a grace that felt like a miracle. Her grandfather, Henry, a retired pilot with a voice as warm as the summer air, had sparked this love when she was barely 5, sitting her on his lap in his cluttered den, its shelves lined with model planes and dog-eared aviation manuals, teaching her how ailerons tilted to turn a plane, how flaps slowed a descent, and why the Airbus A320's fly-by-wire system was a marvel of modern engineering. She'd spent countless evenings on his old flight simulator, her small hands gripping a virtual yoke, navigating virtual storms while Henry's laughter filled the room, calling her his little captain. Now, in Rome, her sketchbook held her latest obsession, a pencil-drawn diagram of the A320's cockpit, every switch, dial and throttle meticulously labeled, sketched late the previous night in her hotel room, the page glowing under the soft light of a bedside lamp. She couldn't explain the urgency that had driven her to draw it, only that it felt like a puzzle she needed to solve, a quiet whisper from the sky that tugged at her heart. Her teacher, Ms. Carter, a kind woman with a knack for noticing the quiet ones, caught a glimpse of the sketch during breakfast, her eyes widening at the intricate lines. "Lila, you're going to build planes one day, aren't you?" she said with a gentle smile, but Lila only blushed, her cheeks warming as she tucked the notebook into her backpack, her fingers lingering on its worn cover. As the group boarded the bus to Fiumicino Airport, Lila claimed a window seat, her backpack at her feet, her sketchbook resting on her lap like a talisman. Her classmates chatted about TikTok videos they'd post or the Roman pizza they'd miss, their voices a blur against the hum of the bus's engine, but Lila's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where planes climbed into the endless blue, leaving faint white trails like threads stitching earth to sky. Airports were her sanctuary, alive with the roar of turbines, the sharp tang of jet fuel, and the purposeful dance of planes taxiing across tarmacs, each one a story of departure and arrival. She'd always felt at home in their chaos, more than in the crowded hallways of her school, or the noisy dinners at home with her parents, Elena and James, and her little brother Noah, who loved to tease her about her plane obsession. Lila's mind wandered to her grandfather's stories, like the time he'd landed a Cessna in a snowstorm, or how he'd taught her to read a VOR indicator by pretending it was a treasure map, guiding her to hidden runways. The memory made her smile, but it was tinged with a strange unease, a weight in her chest she couldn't name, not fear. She loved flying too much for that, but something heavier, like the shadow of a cloud passing over a field. On the bus, her friend Mia nudged her, holding up a tiny gladiator figurine. "Lila, you got anything cool to show off at school?" she asked, but Lila shook her head, her fingers tracing the edges of her sketchbook, where the A320 drawing waited, its lines precise and deliberate. She didn't care about souvenirs. She cared about the plane that would carry them home, its wings slicing through the atmosphere, its systems humming in harmony. As the bus wound through Rome's bustling streets, past ancient fountains and Ivy-draped walls, Lila's heart beat faster, not with the excitement of her peers, but with a quiet certainty that today the sky held something for her, a challenge or a gift she couldn't yet tell. The airport loomed ahead, its glass terminals glinting in the sunlight, and Lila felt the pull of the tarmac, the planes, the endless possibility of flight. She glanced down at her sketchbook, her thumb brushing over the cockpit diagram, and whispered to herself, "You're ready," though she didn't know why she said it, only that it felt true, like a vow made to the sky itself. The Airbus A320 hummed steadily at 35,000 feet, its engines a low, comforting drone, as Flight 719 cut through the night sky, bound from Rome to Chicago. The cabin was a cocoon of calm, with dimmed lights casting a soft glow over passengers nestled under thin airline blankets, some dozing with heads tilted against windows, others flicking through in-flight movies or sipping lukewarm coffee from plastic cups. Lila Thompson, seated in row 12, her sketchbook tucked into the seat pocket, stared out at the endless black where stars blinked faintly above the clouds. The thrill of takeoff had faded, but her mind buzzed, replaying the A320's cockpit diagram she'd drawn the night before, each lever and gauge etched in her memory from hours spent on her grandfather's flight simulator. She didn't know why the sketch felt so urgent, only that it anchored her, like a map to something she couldn't yet see. Around her, her classmates slept or whispered, their excitement from the Rome trip now softened by the long-haul rhythm. But Lila's eyes stayed sharp, catching the occasional flicker of the overhead seatbelt sign. Hours into the flight, a faint unease settled over her, not fear, but a prickle like static before a storm. In the cockpit, Captain Nora Ellis, a veteran with a calm smile and 20 years of flying, checked the altimeter, while First Officer Daniel Chen adjusted their heading, his movements precise. Then, without warning, Nora's head slumped forward, her hands falling limp. Daniel glanced over, his brow furrowing. "Captain?" he said, his voice tight. No response. He reached out, shaking her gently, but she didn't stir. His pulse quickened as he engaged the autopilot, his training kicking in, and pressed the intercom. "We need medical help in the cockpit now," he said, his tone steady but urgent. The call rippled through the cabin, barely noticed by most passengers, who assumed it was a minor issue, but in row 15, Dr. Samuel Reed, a Chicago pediatrician, snapped alert, exchanging a glance with his seatmate, Emma Patel, a retired nurse. They stood, moving swiftly as a flight attendant, Maria Gonzalez, her face pale, led them to the cockpit with a hurried key code. Inside, the air felt wrong, thin and heavy. Nora's breathing was shallow, her pulse faint. Samuel checked her vitals while Emma strapped an oxygen mask to her face. "We need to start compressions," Samuel said, his voice clipped. But as they worked, Daniel's hands began to tremble, his vision blurring. He fumbled for his oxygen mask, missing it, and then collapsed, his head hitting the console with a dull thud. Emma gasped. Not him too. Samuel's eyes darted to a blinking red light on the panel. Cockpit oxygen system failure. "That's why they're down," he said, his voice low. "Hypoxia." They opened the cockpit door to circulate cabin air, but the pilots remained unresponsive despite CPR and emergency oxygen. Panic bloomed in the cabin as Maria's voice crackled over the intercom, trembling but clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, both our pilots are unresponsive. We have medical professionals assisting, and we're in contact with ground control. Please remain calm." Whispers turned to gasps. A woman clutched her daughter, a man muttered prayers, and a teenager fumbled with his phone, trying to text, despite no signal. "No one's flying the plane," a passenger shouted, disbelief sharp in his voice. Maria, gripping the intercom, her knuckles white, spoke again. "If anyone on board has flight experience, military, commercial, private, please come forward immediately." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the hum of the engines. Then, from row 12, a small figure stood, her braids swinging as she raised her hand. "I play flight simulators," Lila said, her voice steady but soft. Heads turned, some scoffing, others staring in shock. "Sweetheart, you mean games?" Maria asked, crouching to her level. Lila shook her head. Real simulators. My grandfather was a pilot. I've logged hundreds of hours. I know the A320's controls. I can try. Nervous laughter rippled through the cabin, but Samuel, still by the cockpit door, nodded. Let her through. We're out of options. Lila stepped forward, her heart pounding but her mind clear, as if her grandfather's voice was guiding her. She entered the cockpit, unfazed by the unconscious pilots, and slid into the co-pilot's seat, her small hands hovering over the yoke. The controls felt familiar, like an extension of her simulator at home. She put on the headset, pressed the radio button and spoke. This is Lila. I'm 12. I'm not a pilot, but I know simulators. I need help flying this plane. A pause, then a calm voice from Shannon Air Traffic Control responded. Lila, you're doing great. We're with you every step. You're very brave. Lila exhaled, her fingers brushing the throttle, her eyes scanning the instruments. The autopilot held steady at 35,000 feet, heading 320, but they were off course, drifting toward the Atlantic. Fuel status? She asked, her voice firm. Enough for Shannon Island, the controller replied. We're rerouting you there. Lila nodded, her focus absolute, as passengers listened, frozen, to a child's voice guiding their fate. The cockpit of Flight 719 was a world of blinking lights and soft hums, its instruments glowing like a constellation under the dim cabin light, as the Airbus A320 cruised at 35,000 feet, its autopilot holding a fragile balance over the Atlantic. Lila Thompson, 12 years old, sat in the co-pilot's seat, her small frame dwarfed by the yoke, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest, her eyes locked on the altimeter and heading indicator, each dial a familiar friend from her grandfather's. Flight simulator. The unconscious pilots, Captain Nora Ellis and First Officer Daniel Chen, lay slumped behind her, tended by Dr. Samuel Reed and Nurse Emma Patel, their efforts futile against the hypoxia that had stolen the pilot's breath. The cockpit door stood open, letting cabin air circulate, but the red warning light, cockpit oxygen system failure, still pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder of the crisis unfolding. Lila's headset crackled with the voice of Claire, the air traffic controller in Shannon Island, her tone calm but urgent, guiding Lila through the chaos with the precision of a lighthouse beam. Lila, you're doing great. Keep the heading at 320 for now. We're setting you up for descent soon, Claire said, her voice a lifeline across the ocean. Lila nodded, though no one could see, her fingers brushing the throttle, her mind racing through her grandfather's lessons. Keep the nose level, trust the instruments, feel the plane. Passengers in the cabin sat frozen, their earlier panic now a hushed awe, as Maria, the flight attendant, relayed updates, her voice trembling but resolute. We have someone at the controls. Please stay seated, she said, omitting Lila's age to quell the rising fear, though whispers spread. A kid, it's a kid flying the plane. A mother in row 8 clutched her toddler, tears streaking her face, while a businessman in a crumpled suit gripped his armrest, muttering, She's our only shot. Lila, oblivious to their stares, focused on Claire's instructions, her voice steady as she confirmed, heading 320, altitude 35,000, fuel good for Shannon. Her sketchbook, tucked in the seat pocket, held her A320 diagram, its lines now alive before her, every switch and gauge exactly where she'd drawn them. Lila, start your descent to 25,000 feet. Throttle back gently, Claire said, and Lila's hands moved with practiced care, easing the throttle, feeling the plane respond as the nose dipped slightly, the engines softening their roar. The cabin tilted, and gasps rippled through the rows, a teenager whispering, She's doing it, oh my God, she's doing it. Dr. Samuel, kneeling by the pilots, glanced at Lila, his voice low with admiration. You're incredible, kid. Lila didn't reply, her jaw tight, her eyes darting between the altimeter and the horizon display, her heart pounding but her mind clear, as if her grandfather's hand rested on her shoulder, whispering, You've got this, little captain. Claire's voice returned. Flaps to 10 degrees when you hit 20,000, Lila, slow and steady. Lila reached for the flap lever, her fingers precise, the plane shuddering slightly as the wings adjusted, slicing through the night with a grace that felt alive. Passengers clung to their seats, some praying, others holding hands, A retired teacher in row 20 sobbing not from fear, but from the weight of a child carrying their lives. "Landing gear down at 5,000 feet, Claire instructed, and Lila's hand moved to the gear switch, the click echoing in the cockpit as the wheels locked into place, the plane trembling like a bird settling onto a branch. The lights of Shannon's runway flickered into view through the windshield, a ribbon of hope against the dark, and Claire's voice softened. "You're lined up, Lila. Pull back just a bit. Glide path is good." Lila adjusted the yoke, her breath shallow but controlled, her eyes fixed on the runway lights growing closer, brighter, until the wheels kissed the tarmac with a jolt, bouncing once before settling into a smooth roll. The cabin erupted in cheers, gasps and sobs, passengers hugging strangers, their relief a tidal wave breaking over the rows. Lila cut the throttle, her hands shaking now, and Claire's voice came through thick with emotion. "Lila, you landed the plane, you did it." Lila sat back, her breath catching, her eyes stinging as she whispered to herself, "I was so scared," her voice barely audible. Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder, his smile warm. "You didn't show it, Lila. You saved us." Maria rushed into the cockpit, tears in her eyes, and hugged Lila tightly, whispering, "You're a miracle." In the cabin, passengers clapped, some standing, others weeping, their voices a chorus of gratitude for the girl who'd brought them safely to Earth. Lila glanced at the sketchbook, its pages still tucked away, and felt a quiet pride, not for the landing, but for the people she'd helped, the faces she'd never forget, the toddler's giggle, the elderly couple holding hands in row 25, the teenager who'd mouthed thank you as the plane slowed. The runway lights glowed outside, and Lila's heart steadied, the weight of the moment settling into something softer, something like hope. She didn't feel like a hero, just a girl who'd done what she could, her grandfather's lessons alive in her hands, her courage a light that had guided 180 souls to safety. The news of Flight 719's miraculous landing spread like wildfire. Across the globe, igniting screens and airwaves with a single electrifying headline, 12-year-old girl lands plane, saves 180 lives. In the hours following the emergency touchdown in Shannon, Ireland, Lila Thompson's name became a beacon, her story looping on CNN, BBC, and local Chicago stations, blurry cell phone videos from the cabin capturing the passengers' rising panic and the surreal calm of her young voice over the intercom, steady as she guided the Airbus A320 to safety. Social media erupted with hashtags, a Lila the pilot, Flight 719 miracle, trending worldwide as passengers shared shaky footage of the landing, their tearful gratitude, and whispers of disbelief that a child had saved them from certain death. Back in Chicago, Lila's quiet neighborhood in Logan Square transformed into a circus. News vans lining the streets before dawn, their satellite dishes tilting toward her family's modest brick bungalow. Reporters knocking politely at first, then lingering with cameras trained on the front door. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some bringing coffee or homemade tamales to Lila's parents, Elena and James, who stood overwhelmed on their porch, shielding their daughter from the spotlight. Lila, still in her favorite hoodie and jeans, sat curled on the living room couch, her knees tucked to her chest, her sketchbook abandoned on the coffee table, its pages still holding the A320 diagram that had guided her hands. The TV was off, the curtains drawn, but the weight of the world's gaze pressed against her, a strange mix of awe and intrusion that made her stomach twist. "Why do they care so much?" she asked her mum, her voice soft, almost lost in the hum of the heater. Elena, brushing a braid from Lila's face, smiled gently. "Because you did something impossible, sweetheart. You gave people hope." James, scrolling through his phone, showed her a tweet from a passenger. "I held my son's hand thinking we'd never see home. Lila, you're our angel." Lila's eyes stung, but she shook her head, whispering, "I just wanted to help, not this." The doorbell rang again. Another delivery of flowers, roses, lilies, daisies, piling up alongside handwritten notes, a stuffed bear in a pilot's cap, and a card from a Texas school signed by 30 kids calling her Captain Lila. She smiled at that, her fingers tracing the bear's tiny goggles, but the attention felt heavy, like a coat too big for her shoulders. At school, the frenzy was no less intense. Her middle school organized an assembly 2 days later. The gym, packed with students, teachers, and even the janitor, Mr. Lopez, who'd once helped Lila fix a model plane's wing. Banners hung across the walls. "Welcome back, Lila, our hero." And the principal's voice cracked as she spoke of courage, her eyes glistening. Lila's classmates stared, some whispering, others beaming, as she stood at the podium, her heart thudding like it had in the cockpit. "I didn't do it alone," she said, her voice small but clear. "Air traffic control, the doctor, the nurse, they helped me. I just remembered what my grandpa taught me, and I tried." The gym roared with applause, but Lila ducked her head, uneasy with the cheers, wishing she could slip back to her desk in Miss Carter's class where she was just Lila, the girl who drew planes during lunch. Later, her best friend Mia pulled her aside, grinning. "You're on TikTok, Lila, millions of views." But Lila hadn't watched the videos, hadn't read the articles, hadn't seen her face plastered across newsstands. It felt wrong, like someone else's story, not hers. She was just a kid who loved planes, who'd sat in her grandfather's den listening to his tales of landing in fog or navigating by stars, never imagining she'd need those lessons to save 180 lives. The letters started arriving, hundreds at first, then thousands, spilling across the dining room table, some from passengers who wrote of holding their loved ones during those terrifying hours, others from kids her age, saying they wanted to be pilots too, their words scrawled in crayon or smudged ink. One letter from an elderly woman in row 25 read, "You gave me another birthday, Lila. I'll never forget you." Lila read it alone in her room, her throat tight, and tucked it into her sketchbook next to the A320 drawing, a quiet reminder of why she'd acted. Her parents tried to shield her, turning away reporters, but the world kept knocking with interview requests from morning shows, aviation blogs, even a documentary crew. Lila wanted none of it. She wanted her old life, the one where she could ride her bike to the library or sketch planes without cameras flashing. Yet even in her overwhelm, she felt a spark of pride, not for the fame, but for the people she'd saved. The toddler who'd giggled as they deplaned, the couple on their honeymoon who'd hugged her in Shannon's terminal, the businessman who'd shaken her hand, tears in his eyes. Her brother Noah, only 9, didn't help, proudly telling everyone at school, "My sister's a hero," while Lila cringed, wishing she could hide in her room with her model planes. But the world wouldn't let her fade. Her story had become a beacon, a reminder that courage could wear a hoodie and sneakers, that a 12-year-old's hands could steer a plane to safety. As the days passed, Lila began to understand the weight of what she'd done, not just for the passengers, but for her family, her neighborhood, the kids who now saw planes differently because of her. She sat on her bed one evening, sketching a new plane design, the pencil moving with a rhythm that calmed her, and whispered to herself, "I did something good," her voice soft but sure, a promise to keep going, to keep learning, to keep reaching. For the sky. The world seemed to hold its breath as Lila Thompson's story continued to ripple, her name now a symbol of courage etched into headlines and hearts. But for the 12-year-old from Chicago, the quiet of her family's bungalow offered little reprieve from the clamor outside. A week after Flight 719's miraculous landing, a gold-embossed envelope arrived, delivered by a courier in a crisp suit, its seal bearing the unmistakable emblem of the White House. Lila's hands trembled as she opened it, her parents, Eleanor and James, peering over her shoulder, their eyes wide with disbelief as they read the invitation, an audience with the President of the United States to honor her bravery. Her little brother Noah, bouncing with excitement, declared, "You're going to meet the President, Lila." But Lila only clutched the letter, its weight heavier than the sketchbook she'd carried through Rome, her mind spinning with a mix of awe and dread. The flight to Washington, D.C., arranged by the government, felt surreal, the private jet's hum a stark contrast to the A320's roar, and Lila sat by the window, watching clouds drift past, her fingers tracing the creased invitation she hadn't let go of since it arrived. At Dulles Airport, 2 black SUVs waited, driven by a protocol officer named Ms. Harper, who smiled warmly and said, "Lila, you just be you today. We've got everything else covered." The city unfolded like a postcard, cherry blossoms lining the streets, monuments glowing in the crisp morning light, the Washington Monument piercing the sky like a needle. But Lila's gaze stayed inward, her heart pounding as the SUV turned on to Pennsylvania Avenue, where the White House stood, its white columns gleaming, a place she'd only seen in history books. Reporters lined barricades, their cameras flashing, some holding signs reading "Lila, our sky hero," and one in bold blue letters, "From Chicago to the stars." Her family stepped out, Elena in a borrowed navy dress, James tugging nervously at his tie, Noah trying to look serious despite his grin. But all eyes were on Lila, her sneakers scuffing the pavement, her hoodie swapped for a simple green dress her mom had picked out. A White House aide led them through ornate corridors, past portraits of past presidents and marble busts that seemed to watch her, their footsteps echoing on polished floors until they reached the Oval Office. The doors opened, revealing a room, smaller than Lila expected, but grander than any she'd known, its blue rug starred with gold, the air thick with history. The president stood behind the desk, taller than on TV, his smile kind as he stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Lila Thompson, the girl who flew a plane," he said, his voice warm, and Lila shook his hand, her own shaking slightly, managing a quiet, "Thank you, sir." He knelt to her level, his eyes meeting hers. "You saved 180 lives with nothing but courage and a clear head. You're not just a hero, you're a gift to this nation." Cameras clicked, but Lila barely heard them, her ears ringing as she sat with her family, the president asking about Noah's soccer games and Elena's job as a librarian, making them feel like old friends. An aide handed him a velvet box, and the room stilled as he opened it, revealing a gleaming Presidential Citizens Medal, its blue ribbon catching the light. "For extraordinary bravery and composure under pressure," he read, "Lila Thompson is awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal, the highest civilian honor." A military officer stepped forward, placing the medal around her neck, its weight settling on her shoulders like a promise, and Lila glanced at her parents, Elena's tears silent, James's hand over his mouth, Noah clapping before anyone else. The president moved to a podium, the broadcast going live, his voice steady. "Today we honor a child who reminded us that heroism knows no age. Lila showed us what it means to act when the world is falling apart." He paused, smiling at her, then announced, "The United States will grant Lila Thompson a $30 million trust fund for her bravery and a full scholarship to any aviation or STEM program in the world, from MIT to NASA's flight school." Gasps filled the room, cameras flashing like a storm, and Lila froze, the numbers too vast to grasp, her eyes finding her mum's, now openly weeping, and her dad's, his face pale with shock. The president handed her a second envelope, another scholarship, and Lila took it with both hands, her heart racing but her mind calm, the same clarity she'd felt in the cockpit returning. The room erupted in a standing ovation, officials and press clapping, but Lila stood slowly, not for the cameras, but because she felt the moment in her bones, a turning point she couldn't yet name. That night, in the White House's Lincoln bedroom, its antique wallpaper glowing under soft light, Lila lay awake, the medal still around her neck, the scholarship envelope on the nightstand. Her family slept nearby, exhausted, Noah snoring softly on a velvet couch, but Lila stared at the ceiling, thinking of the passengers, the toddler's laugh, the elderly couple's clasped hands, the thank you notes now stacked in her room. "I did something good," she whispered, the words grounding her, and for the first time since the landing, she felt not like a hero, but like Lila, a girl who'd faced the sky and won. The future stretched before her, vast as the clouds she'd flown through, and though she didn't know if she'd be a pilot, an engineer, or something else, she knew she'd spend her life earning this moment, carrying the gratitude of 180 souls with every step. The months following Lila Thompson's heroic landing of Flight 719 unfolded like a dream she hadn't asked for, her quiet Chicago life now a whirlwind of camera flashes and headlines that painted her as a prodigy, a miracle, a girl who'd touched the stars. Yet at 12, Lila longed for the simplicity of her old bedroom, its walls lined with model planes and sketches, where she could lose herself in the hum of a pencil on paper, not the buzz of a world that wouldn't look away. The $30 million trust fund and scholarship to any aviation or STEM program sat heavy in her mind, not as burdens, but as promises she felt bound to honor, her grandfather's voice echoing, "Keep flying, little captain." She returned to her Logan Square school one crisp spring morning, wearing sneakers and a hoodie. Her backpack slung over one shoulder, no entourage, just Lila, craving the normalcy of math homework and cafeteria chatter. The school gates buzzed with whispers that turned to cheers as classmates swarmed her, their eyes bright with awe, asking, "Were you scared?" Or, "How'd you know what to do?" Her teacher, Ms. Carter, stood in the doorway of room 12, her smile trembling as she said, "Lila, you came back to us." Lila nodded, her throat tight, and took her old seat, the desk still etched with her initials, a faint reminder of the girl she'd been before the sky called her name. During a special assembly, the gym packed with students and staff, banners, proclaiming Lila our star, Ms. Carter spoke of courage, her voice cracking, and asked Lila to share. Standing at the podium, her hands gripping its edges, Lila said, "I wasn't the bravest or the smartest. I just loved planes, and when it mattered, I remembered what I'd learned. You can too, whatever you love. It might save someone someday." The room erupted, but Lila's heart stayed quiet. Her words meant not for applause, but for the kid in the back dreaming of being a firefighter, or the girl who shyly said she wanted to fly planes too. Lila hugged her, whispering, "You will, I know it." Back home, letters kept arriving, thousands now, spilling across the dining table, from passengers who wrote of holding loved ones during those terrifying hours, from kids in Brazil and Japan who saw her as proof they could be more. One, from a pilot in training, read, "You made me believe I could do this, Lila, thank you." She began writing a memoir, Wings of Courage, in her own words late at night, her pencil scratching out the fear, the focus, the faces she'd never forget, the toddler's giggle, the elderly couple's clasped clutched hands in row 25, the businessman who'd shaken her hand with tears in his eyes. She refused ghostwriters, insisting the book be her voice, raw and honest, a testament to the ordinary days that shaped her and the extraordinary moment that changed her. The memoir, published a year later, became a beacon for young dreamers, its pages filled with her sketches and stories, not just of the flight, but of her grandfather's den, where model planes dangled from the ceiling, and his laughter fueled her courage. Lila's school visit lingered in her heart, the cheers of her classmates, the girl who wanted to be a pilot, the way Miss Carter's eyes shone with pride, all reminders that her story wasn't hers alone. It belonged to every kid who dared to dream big. That spring, Lila enrolled in a youth aviation program, her scholarship paving the way, and she spent weekends at a local airfield, learning to fly a Cessna, her hands steady on the yoke, the sky no longer a distant dream, but a friend she knew, by heart. One evening she sat on her school's playground, the same one where she'd once pretended the slide was a runway, watching a plane carve a white trail across the dusk, its engines a faint hum that felt like a heartbeat. Her brother Noah ran up, his soccer ball under his arm, grinning. "You thinking about flying again, Captain Lila?" he teased, and she laughed, ruffling his hair, the medal from the White House tucked under her shirt, a quiet reminder of her strength. She pulled out her sketchbook, now filled with new designs, planes she dreamed of building with wings that curved like a bird's and engines that sang like her grandfather's stories. Letters still arrived, from a girl in Kenya who wanted to be an engineer, a boy in Ireland who'd been on Flight 719, now training to be a paramedic, each one a thread connecting her to the world she'd touched. Lila's memoir ended with a message. "You don't need to be older or stronger to be brave, you just need to believe you can." At the airfield, her instructor, a gruff woman named Captain Torres, told her, "You've got the sky in your blood, kid." And Lila smiled, feeling her grandfather's pride in the wind that rustled her hair. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon gold, she stood on the playground, her sneakers scuffing the dirt, and looked up, the plane's trail fading into the blue. The headlines had quieted, the cameras gone, but Lila's legacy lived in the kids who now saw planes as possibilities, in the passengers who wrote her every year, in the quiet strength she carried, knowing she'd given 180 people another day to live, love, and dream. She was still just Lila, her toast half-eaten because she'd been staring at clouds, her pencils scattered across her desk. But she was also more, a symbol of what happens when a heart says yes to a moment that could break it. The sky wasn't a dream anymore. It was hers, personal, familiar, a canvas for her future. Her phone buzzed, another invitation, this time from a STEM camp at NASA. But she pocketed it, wanting to stay 12 for a little longer, to feel the grass under her feet, and hear her classmates' laughter in the distance. The bell rang, students spilled out, some waving, others staring in awe. And Lila stood still, a girl who'd flown a plane when no one else could, who'd reminded the world that heroes come in sneakers and braids. As the last light brushed gold across Chicago's rooftops, Lila looked to the horizon, her eyes calm, her heart full, ready to soar again, not for fame, but for the love of flight, for the people she'd saved, for the girl she'd always been.